Hello, I am Mukesh Bansal. Welcome to SparX. We are back to solo episodes after a long gap. I guess we've been very busy shooting with guests. There are so many interesting people out there and just can't resist reaching out to a lot of interesting folks. But there are topics we want to deep dive into. And one of my all-time favorite topic is books. The studio is surrounded with books. You have seen in all episodes, we try to have as many books behind me. We get a lot of questions from people who are listeners for this podcast asking, book recommendations, what are the books in the library, if we can get the book tour. We are not there yet, but today I really want to talk about power of books, why I think books really matter. Books have certainly have had an enormous impact in my personal life, how I think, how my career has unfolded. I'm also a huge advocate of, I think everyone should read books. How much or what pace, it's up to you. Whether fiction or non-fiction, that's again personal choice. But I think books are absolutely outstanding. My journey with books started, I would say, relatively late. Unlike kids these days who get a lot of exposure to book in the primary school with the so much great children fiction books that are out there, starting with Roald Dahl and many other really good authors, pretty much the rite of passage for most kids to read Harry Potter books. So back in 80s, we didn't have those options, beyond comics. But I remember when I was in high school, I was visiting a relative of mine and he had this book called 100 Great Lives. And I flipped through some pages. There was, biography of people like Thomas Edison or Einstein or Mahatma Gandhi. They're just little 4 or 5 page biographies, but I was quite intrigued. That's pretty much first time I was reading a biography of someone who's really well known, who has made a huge impact on the world. And you can read, as you read about their lives, you realize they're both normal human beings at some level, similar lives as what all of us experience in our everyday, and yet they did something in their lifetime that literally changed the world. I was quite intrigued. I literally begged my relative to lend me the book. I brought it with me and over next week or so, read it once, read it twice, read it 3 times. And I was absolutely fascinated. This book is, I think, still in circulation. If you're interested, you can check it out by Rupa Publications called 100 Great Lies. Maybe I should go back to and read it again. That was first serious book I've read, but I think that sparked my interest in books and I was really intrigued. Initially, I want to read more biographies, but in general, and I discovered one trick when I was in 9th grade that when you read a book, usually on the back cover, the publisher will have their address, and I don't know how I got the idea. But I wrote to one of the publishers saying, I read this book, I really liked it. Can you send me your catalog? And this was a physical letter. I wrote by hand, put a 35 pesos, stamp on it and mailed it. And after 3-4 weeks, I got this full catalog in email. I was super intrigued. Catalog had almost probably a few hundred books from the publisher. I don't remember their name now. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. These guys are actually willing to send you catalog. And then it kind of became a hobby. Pretty much any book I'll come across, the first thing I'll do, I'll go to back cover. I'll write down the address of the publisher and write a letter, saying something nice about one of their books and say how much, I like book, which to be honest, I did not like books, but I quite like idea of books at that time. And before you know it, after a year or so, I had like dozens of catalogs from so many publishers. And it was, so that really sparked my both curiosity, but also a lot of gratefulness. These publishers from different parts of the country entertaining your letter from a kid, who is at least claiming to have some interest in books and sending across this physical catalog. So it became my, almost like prized possession. I had these catalogs that basically nobody in the neighborhood had, and I felt there's something unique that I'm able to compile. I had no idea that will eventually translate into fairly deep, I think, love for books. And then I got busy with exam preparation stuff. I was reading books, but those were exam prep book. I won't really call them books now, but that was my life for next few years. And then when I was at IIT Kanpur, one of the most iconic thing in IIT Kanpur was this massive library. And first time you walk in, you really feel this sense of awe. I'm guessing IIT Kanpur library will probably have hundreds of thousands of books. Probably at that time, all the best books probably ever published. Most of them, a lot of them technical, but they had pretty much all genres. Academic life was tough, so first couple of years I was not reading as much, but at some point my interest in academics started to wane, and I would start to hang out in library more. Initially, just for the peace that you find in library, but also serendipity about browsing through many different aisles, just reading the titles of the books, authors' names, flipping through or reading the back cover and so on. And after wandering through library for many months, at some point I ended up in the encyclopedia section and came across Encyclopedia Britannica, and the claim that Britannica made at the time, that is pretty much compilation of the world's knowledge. These thick volumes, 24 volumes if I'm right, and just flipping through again some pages of Britannica, you can read about any topic in science or history or about any person or a lot of esoteric topics. And I started dreaming at that time that one day I would like to own Encyclopedia Britannica. When I say working, eventually I tried to buy, but by the time they were out of circulation, digital age happened and everything became digital, and Wikipedia eventually became, much bigger. But I was quite intrigued with the depth of knowledge in Encyclopedia Britannica at that time. So at the IIT library in third and fourth year in college, when I was really not paying much attention to what's being taught in the classes, so I was discovering a lot of different subjects and topics in the library, including reading a lot of books about business and entrepreneurship. And I think that had a deep impact on how my eventual career unfolded. Somewhere I think the seeds of entrepreneurship were born. I think it can be directly attributed to the books I was reading, because I really didn't have any entrepreneur role model at that time. But more on that later. Few years down the line, I end up in Bay Area and try to start a company in Silicon Valley, which didn't go anywhere. But there was this insane stock market frenzy in late 90s in US. There are all these .com companies who are going public. There's a company you won't have heard of. They'll go public. Their valuation will shoot into billions. And the insane amount of daily trading, and that's what kind of intrigued me about day trading, which I did. Now I regret doing it. But during that time, I had a realization that I don't know anything about investing, how stocks work, how mutual funds work, how bonds work. So I remember ordering all these books, probably a dozen or so books, and went over all of them over 3-4 month period. And I felt I had a much better understanding of the markets in general. There's some outstanding book, from Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, Reminiscence of a Stock Market Operator, which is a classic, Ben Graham's book about value investing. And I realized, wow, that's so incredibly powerful. I studied computer science. I had no idea about markets or stocks, but just after reading 10, 12 books, I had a perspective on how these things work, what the fundamentals are, how things are probably certain way, how market cycle work. Not that it made me a great investor. I still did not do well as a day trader. I don't think anyone can do really well as a day trader unless you are probably a professional. But I think this idea got reinforced that you want to learn about a topic, just go to Amazon, find good books on the topic, and give yourself some time to go through. And if you are able to read 10-15 books about a topic, you get such a comprehensive understanding about the entire domain. You get to learn from different viewpoints. You get to understand what are the established truths of that field, because most authors will keep going back to same stories, same fundamentals. They will have their own perspective also. So you'll see what people largely agree on, where there are disagreements, what are some of the outlier ideas in that field. And I think that pattern got etched in my head, and I've used that pattern again. I call it, very simple tool, 10 books for a topic. if you're genuinely interested in any topic, let's take an example of AI. So I am super interested in AI. I think everyone is interested or should be interested, because probably the biggest technological shift of our time that's unfolding. But most of us might be just consumer of ChatGPT. We have probably no idea how it works or what future upgrades will happen and how will impact the tools we use in our everyday life. How will it change the nature of work? So how do you go about understanding this? This is a question I was asking myself about 6 months ago. So you guessed it. I basically looked up all possible books on AI. And Amazon makes life very easy. You can see how well rated the book is. All books are not great. Some books are written really well, some books are not so well. So the ratings, my benchmark is on Amazon. If it is rated 4.3, 4.4 or more than 4.0 on Goodreads, and at least has few hundred ratings. If it has few thousand ratings, that's outstanding. That means a lot of people have read that book. So I created my own kind of books playlist of sorts on AI, and last 6 months, I think I'm close to 20 books now. I first started with I would call it more layman type of books, which is written for people without technical knowledge. Through those books, I was able to understand the history of AI, how AI started in 50s, how it has gone through few AI winters, where there was initially a lot of hype that AI will change everything. Then nothing much happened and the funding dried down, research stopped. But some lone warriors kept at it. They came up with new breakthroughs. Some of the legends of AI now, Geoffrey Hinton, Yann LeCun, Andrew Ng, and few others, who made pivotal breakthroughs. So I'm able to, reading those books, I have an understanding of how we came to be, why, AI looks like, overnight phenomena, but people have been at it for last 7 decades. What are those 5-6 fundamental breakthroughs? What are the key research centers? Surprisingly, a lot of breakthrough work in AI happened not in Silicon Valley, but in University of Toronto, where Jeff Hinton is based, and a lot of his students, and in London, where DeepMind was based. But we'll talk about AI probably in a different episode in a lot more depth. The idea is reading these 20-odd books has given me a mental map of sorts to be able to visualize the whole field and also to say what's next. Now I'm able to get to little more technical aspects of AI, and there are a lot of really good books around that. Not very easy to read, but there's something I think related to the work I am currently doing. So hence I'm diving in. I think this pattern has played out time and again for me in different phases of life. When I was in Silicon Valley doing 10 years, and I was around startup environments, but in the early days, I did not understand that much about startups. So I started reading about startups, and it turns out there are a lot of amazing books written about startups, business building. There are a few authors I came across during the period, who have had profound impact on how I think about startup world. One of them is Jim Collins. His 2 books, Built to Last and Good to Great, I think are the best business books ever written. I have read Good to Great at least 4 or 5 times by now. Some of the phrases that he uses in the book, for example, get right people on the bus and wrong people off the bus, or something that he calls hedgehog concept. They're like deeply etched in my brain. I'm able to relate to these concepts in various situations that arises in the companies that I have been part of. I would not have that vocabulary or those concepts if I have not read those books. Other thing that I picked up in Silicon Valley is, the companies had very different culture compared to, at least, growing up, what we'll see in the traditional hierarchical companies. And I want to understand more about that. So when my entrepreneurial journey started, I looked up books related to building organization culture, came across work of Peter Drucker. He is again one of the foremost business gurus, or probably the most prominent business guru of last century. Has written many profound books. His phrase, culture will eat strategy for breakfast any day, is so deep and profound. There's a book, Work Rules, which was written by one of the Google HR leaders, and later on, I think, another book called How Google Works. both gave me pretty deep window into why Google is different by design, how Google um, flouted all the norms of company building from day one. At some point, they had a rule that they will never have any manager. There's a very famous story in, I think, 2001 or 2, where Larry Page basically fired all the managers. He believed only engineers should do the work and managers should not create bureaucracy in the company. That experiment didn't work, but they did try a lot of different experiments, about 20% time that you would have probably heard about. They borrowed a lot of concepts from academia. Now, as I was going about building organization at Myntra, later on Cure.fit, you have to make a lot of design choices about what kind of organization you want, what policy do you want. So you can either just assume, let's just do it how everyone does, because it must be very standard, or you can think about this from blank slate. So having read all these books about different Silicon Valley companies, books about Amazon are very insightful. There is this really good book on Amazon called The Everything Store that gives you visibility into Jeff Bezos' way of thinking. Again, he made a lot of fundamental choices about how Amazon was designed, and I was able to borrow all these principles and share with the teams that I was working with. And sometimes we'll just copy as it is. Sometimes we'll modify it. Sometimes we'll take inspiration from that and do it our way. But if I did not have exposure to those books, I will not have those ideas. So for me, by now it has become a conditioned habit that whenever I encounter a new situation, my default reaction is to go to Amazon, Goodreads, or just look up best books of all time on that topic and aim to read in the range of 10 to 15 books. At some point, if you can believe it, during Myntra early days, I read a bunch of books about fashion and got to know about Chanel's story, how the various design labels evolved over a period of time, how fashion industry works, how stylists think, and that gave me very different perspective. I feel after a while I'm able to understand a domain at a deeper level and engage in a very different kind of conversation versus if I would just think, okay, we are selling fashion stuff online and how does e-commerce work and so on, but no deeper understanding or appreciation for where does fashion comes from, who designs, why some things are in vogue today, why fashion happens, cycle and so on. So reading all these books about fashion gave me that perspective. When we started Cure.fit, I read so many books about health that at some point I felt I know so much about health that I should translate that into a book, which eventually became Hacking Health. I think for Hacking Health, between me and the team that was working with me, we would have read probably over 100 books. And when you read 100 plus books on a topic, and this is not something I'm recommending, it's very painful to read 100 books. They also become very repetitive and boring after a while. But I guess if you're going to write a book on a topic, then that kind of investment is warranted. So yeah, whether it's it's health or entrepreneurship or anything related to technology, sometimes if I get interested in macroeconomics, which was the case last 2 years, I read a bunch of books around that. And I feel this is, at least in terms of understanding something deeply and seeing the intricacies of the subject, reading multiple books on topic is probably a lot more helpful than just reading one book. There is also a danger in if you just read one book. A lot of authors are quite opinionated, and rightly so. I think if you're going to write a book, you need to have a clear perspective and opinion about what you're trying to say. But if we read only one book, we get too influenced about that perspective, and we feel the authors write very authoritatively. I'm guessing both have probably same root, and you feel like, okay, that's how it's done. This opinion is how maybe everyone thinks about that, and it may color your thinking also. So reading multiple books can provide a good counter to that, where you are able to see many different perspectives and then choose for yourself what do you believe in, what perspective you want to take on that field. I think, reading these books and eventually when I wrote a couple of books, in fact, I'm done writing my third book, and we'll probably talk about that also in some of these podcast episodes. The third book is about entrepreneurship. It's called Seed to Scale. At least that's a working name. It might change by the time we publish it. But as I was writing my first book and second book, I realized the incredible effort the authors have to take to write a book. Most books takes 2 to 5 years. Some books takes even a decade or more, where authors really go into that field, and it applies equally to both fiction books and non-fiction books. In fiction books also, authors have to imagine all these worlds, all these characters. To make the character relatable, they still need to understand the facts on the ground. They need to review a lot of literature around the topic so that whatever they're saying is still relatable. So now imagine an author, and a lot of these authors are some of the best people in their field. They could be top academic or journalists or authors. They are taking many years of their life researching something at incredible level of depth, and then translating that into book format, which will probably go through many iterations. No author ever publishes his or her first draft. In fact, first draft are usually pretty bad. It's only through iterations get better. So now think about the total cost in terms of time and money that authors are investing in writing that book. And now all of us can buy that book for few hundred rupees. It takes, on average, 5 to 10 hours to read a book. So the way I think of it as, buying and reading a book is equivalent to hiring a world expert for few hundred rupees and few hours of investment from your side to get access to best possible minds in the world, their way of thinking, and benefit from multi-year effort they would have put in writing that book. I genuinely believe that books have insane ROI compared to any investment you can think of. You give me any investment where you spend 400-500 rupees and it has potential to change your life. There are incredible examples of many people talking about how one book can change their life. I think it has happened to me multiple times. There are a lot of people who talk about it regularly. You might have seen it happen in your life. And so this asymmetry of how little it requires on your part to invest versus how much effort an author is investing makes book one of the most unique way of consuming information, consuming knowledge, consuming point of view, and you have that much more richer perspective as a result. Sometimes I find that reading a book is like having a conversation with the author. Now, these authors may be long gone and dead. Imagine reading a book someone wrote a couple of 100 years ago, and as the author is talking about the subject, you are hearing author speak in your head. You might have a reaction to it. You may pause and reflect on it. You may argue with the author. You may say you disagree. You have a different point of view. And how amazing is that? These people would have, if you're born before the invention of printed books, we never would have benefited from this. In fact, there are, there's a lot of records of, if you go back just 500 years ago, before the invention of printing press, each book had to be manually copied by hand. Very, very few people had access to books. Most people will have just access to oral traditions. But today, we have pretty much access to all the books, and there are, unfortunately, or rather fortunately, tens of millions of books. But you can pick up any of those and engage in this rich, deep dialogue with the author. If you pick up a great fiction book, it's a really nice way to take your mind off of whatever is happening in your life every day. You are transported into different world. You get deeply connected in the lives of the characters that author has built. You get vested in the outcome of what happens in the life of those characters. But as a result, also a lot of subtle things are happening in your brain. You are exercising your imagination. Think about it. You are reading black and white words, but you are feeling all these emotions related to characters, which means you are exercising your imagination. So people who read a lot of fiction, their ability to imagine goes up. You are basically, it's almost like a movie that's playing in your head, which your brain is creating. You're feeding the script, which is the book and the description characters, but you're visualizing all these words and characters and emotions. It's also said that fiction authors are best experts on human psychology. If you historically, any of the great fiction writers, the way they are able to bring out so many nuances of human emotions that formal science is only now starting to study and describe and understand the mechanism behind it. Proust's book, In Search of Lost Time, it's an absolute classic. It's a humongous book, I think over 1,000 pages long, but people say this is the best psychology book of all time. He has so painstakingly examined, how our thought process work, what we think about other people, what we think other people think about us, and so many nuances that plays out that affect all of us. That book is nearly 100-year-old, but now some aspects of how Proust built his character, how he describes how deep, visceral understanding he has about human emotions, that modern psychology is starting to articulate, starting to build a vocabulary. So science is, in this case, 50 to 100 years behind of what this particular author was able to see, and we see that play out again and again through various fiction authors, especially people who are able to write very richly about just dynamics of what happens in our lives. I think books are also in some way mirror to our own characters. We learn so much about ourselves. When you relate to a character, you are basically saying, this person is some ways like me. I can imagine myself being in his or her shoes. I can relate to the trials and tribulations that this character is going through. And you can take back that understanding in your real life. When you go back, you probably have similar situations, probably not as dramatic, and sometimes, as they say, truth can be stranger than fiction, maybe sometimes even more dramatic. But the point is, you will be armed. It's almost like you've encountered a situation before. You have a way to think about it. You have some tools. So I think both fiction and non-fiction books are empowering you in some ways to have much better, richer lives. Other, great benefit of books compared to any other active media is you can slow down the pace. If you are watching something on Netflix, you are fully engrossed. The scene is continuously moving from one plot to other, and you have no time to stop and reflect. Books are very different. You can have very slow and unhurried pace. If something catches your fancy, you can just pause. You can think about it. You can articulate your own thoughts about it. If you like, you can even write down few things, because thoughts begets other thoughts. We hear something, then we think of something else. So that's only possible in either real world conversation. At least we are having conversation with people who are good listeners. Some people are not, and then maybe it will not apply there. But yeah, if with the good friends and good listeners, probably you get some time to reflect and say what you want to say. I think books are like that outstanding friends. They don't take offense. You can pause anytime. You can think as much as you want. You can come back to it. If you want, you can go back to previous page. You can highlight, the people who are fans of paper books, they love to highlight with all these colorful highlighters. I have personally never gotten to that habit, but the digital devices also have a mechanism to highlight. So you can save your highlights. There are great tools now which automatically saves and compiles all your highlights. You can go back to that. But this idea of being able to have a dialogue with your book, I think makes book very different than any other form of audio-visual content that you consume. That tends to be just one-sided. You listen to it, it's entertaining in the moment, but the retention is very low. There is really no back and forth with that medium which books enable. There are many authors who have had profound impact on my life. I keep going back to their books. I also anticipate the release of their new books. two examples of authors whose books I think I've been waiting for a long time. One is Ray Kurzweil. He is a inventor, futurist, founder of X Prize, Singularity University, many other things. So in 2006, I read his, actually it was his second book. At that time it was called Fantastic Voyage, Live Long Enough to Live Forever. So very quirky title, but he's a credible guy. I read the book and it opened up my eyes to this whole world of research that's happening in the longevity space. His core argument in the book was that technological progress is exponential. As human beings, we are not able to visualize anything exponential. If you add 1 to 1 every day, after 10 years, you'll have become 10. But if you keep doubling every year, 1 will become 1,000. And his point was, for most of our technological progress is exponential in nature. And the same thing is happening in the world of aging and longevity. And it totally opened up my eyes to how promising that field is. Since then, I've read a lot of his books. I've developed huge amount of interest in longevity space. We had an episode with Ben Greenfield and Marcus. I continue to track that space, but more on that again, maybe later episode. So his one of his predictions, around I think few years later, he had this book called Singularity is Near, and where he made the argument that by late 30s, which is 2030s, AI would have advanced so much that we'll basically be co-living with AI. And the day AI becomes as smart as human, the rate of progress will just become uncontrollable, because then AI will be able to create even smarter AI, because we as intelligent beings have created AI, which is, let's say, by the time better than us. And AI can, work at a warp speed that we humans can't. So it creates better AI, it creates even better AI, and it's a runaway effect with no end in sight. And that's what he called singularity. There are a lot of critiques to that book as well, but I think the idea in the book were quite profound. That was in 2008 or 9. And in 2015-16, he started talking about his next book called Singularity is Nearer. The book hasn't come out yet, but it's finally going to come out this year. So as soon as the book comes out, I'm going to take 4 or 5 days off and immerse myself into it. Given all the accelerated growth we are seeing in AI is no longer something in future. It is happening as we speak. A lot of investment is going in. But that's example of one book. Other author that I really like is Robert Greene. Some may call him somewhat controversial, but I think his books like Mastery have had profound impact on my life. Mastery is about how some people achieve this insane level of expertise in their field. If you think about somebody like Leonardo da Vinci or Einstein or Michael Jordan, how some people achieve this incredible level of depth and expertise, and more often than not, they start out like just normal people. In their early days, there is no sign that they are destined for great things. If you think about Mahatma Gandhi, his first 30 years were very mediocre. Einstein had poor grades and remarks on his scorecards that he will not amount to much as a scientist. In fact, he did not get admission to a PhD program anywhere. So the whole process of what these people go through, what are the patterns, what we can infer, he has articulated in the book Mastery. I have read it already 4 or 5 times, but one of his books called so some of his other books were super interesting. There is something called 48 Laws of Power. The book is so profound but also controversial. It's kind of breaks down how does power work and what are the fundamental laws around power. The book is also quite Machiavellian. It's very manipulative. Some people think the book is very dangerous. It's actually banned in a lot of prisons because people think that people can take lessons from the book and they can manipulate, dominate people around themselves. So I'm not necessarily recommending the book, but I think if you read this, you get pretty good insights about how humans work. And if nothing else, you don't need to manipulate other people to do your bidding, but you can protect yourself. These laws I think are in operation all around us. One author who I think again has a big impact on how I look at things, especially my approach to work, is Cal Newport. He is professor of computer science. When I read his book Deep Work, I was absolutely blown away. That I feel I've always struggled with productivity in my life. Like any entrepreneur and someone who wants to learn about new things and have some hobbies, you're always hard pressed for time. Deep Work opened up very different way to look at things, and I've talked about earlier in the productivity chapter, but it gave me new insights and new tools to think about my approach to work. In some ways, the whole idea of less is more, focus on one thing, just staying concentrated on one thing for very long stretch of time is probably the most effective way to be productive. His recent book called Slow Productivity, I just read a few months ago, develops this idea further. It's counter to the whole hustle culture. We are trying to do more, fast, as opposed to like really deliberately slowing things down. And trust me, it's really hard, with the kind of stimulus we get, kind of temptation we have, things to indulge in. But the idea of slow productivity is blocking as many things as possible, saying no to as many things as you can. I like the book so much that I think at some point we'll probably do a whole episode only on the idea of slow productivity. His other book, Digital Minimalism, was one of the first one in the world to call out the danger of the digital addiction. We covered some of that in our episode on digital minimalism. Pretty much every single of his book is outstanding read. It's very well researched. He writes really well. Some of the other authors I really like is Ryan Holiday, and he has made Stoic philosophy cool and popular and relevant. I hope we are able to get him on this podcast some point, but all 8-9 of his books are full of insights and tools. And what's so cool about them is this is wisdom which is there for over 2000 years. All he's doing is digging up these resources and stories and writing it in a way that we can relate to in our own lives. Stephen Pressfield, he's a outstanding author. His primary genre is fiction. Some of his books have been converted into movies like Legend of Bagger Vance and few others. But he has this other set of books. One of his really cool book is called War of Art. And I'm saying War of Art, not Art of War. Art of War by Sun Tzu is also an amazing book, but again, a bit Machiavellian. But parking that, I think War of Art is about if you are a creative professional, and he argues all of us are creative professionals because we do create something. The act of creation requires imagination, marrying different ideas, sitting down and writing. So War of Art, he talks about this idea of resistance. And he says that, resistance is something all of us has inside us. If you ever try to, finish a homework or time, you know exactly what resistance is. There is something inside you which just keeps gnawing at you to just wait a little more, wait for, later time. I was procrastinating, before starting the shoot today, and I tried to convince the team that let's do today, but they forced me to we need to start now. So he talks about this whole idea of resistance. How do we recognize it, acknowledge it, and work around it? His whole series of work, a whole series of books around this idea with very interesting titles. And one is Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be. One is Do the Work, or something about acting like pros and so on. And very interesting style of writing. These thin books you can easily finish in an hour each. Walter Isaacson, another favorite author of mine. He's probably along with David McCullough, one of the best biographers of all time. I think one of his first biographies I read was of Steve Jobs, right after Jobs died, narrating rise of Apple and Steve Jobs' way of looking at things. And the good thing about how he writes books is he doesn't just talk about good things, but also talks about a lot of very deep human flaws that all of us has. So his characters, become both relatable as well as you can see through what traits, what tools, what practice are behind the genius or the output they've created. I think I read most of Isaacson biographies from Leonardo da Vinci, to Ben Franklin, which is a very entertaining read. Wright brothers, the invention of aircraft. These guys were bicycle manufacturers, or their day job was to repair bicycles, but they were also um, aviation enthusiasts, and eventually became the inventors of first powered human flight. His book Code Breakers, about Jennifer Doudna, which is how she ended up creating CRISPR as a tool for gene editing and starting the whole new biotech revolution, is amazing. Recently, he came out with a book on Elon Musk. Again, we get too much of Elon Musk on news these days, but again, those are very headline level, just very superficial coverage. But the book goes into who he is as a person, what made him who he is, how he make choices, what are his really weird personality quirks, but also what goes behind this absolute maniacal intensity where he can talk about building humanity, multiplanetary species, or getting rid of fossil fuels and so on. So it's just outstanding. I'll very heavily recommend any of Isaacson's books, depending upon which character, which story you're interested in. If you are into world of books have a way of showing up when you need them the most. I remember in my early 20s, I was quite lost. I really didn't know what was happening to my career, what choices I want to make. I came across two really short and sweet books. One is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and other is Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And for some reason, both books had very deep impact on me. I think they calmed me down, gave me perspective, somehow both inspired me and helped me build patience in my life. I've gone back to both books many times. I think Siddhartha is still very relatable. I think Seagull, not as much. I think there was probably time in my life where it was very relatable. Similarly, I wanted to read Alchemist for the longest period of time, but somehow just didn't. But when I started it, I ended up finishing in the same day, just could not put it down. And book has mysticism, book has, deep life lessons, and something, which really touches you. It's a simple story and yet so profound and timeless that most of the time what we are searching is right where we are. We just don't realize it. But I've read the book a few times. If I am not in good mood and need a bit of motivation, I think any of these books will do. There are many other books, they have each in their own time left a deep impression. And I feel like each book in some ways, if you really relate to it, it changes in a small manner. And over a period of time, if you've read hundreds of books, you end up becoming a very different person. Just like people around us change. Similarly, the books that we read or content we consume, if it is not good content, is for sure going to change us. So if you can be selective about which books you are exposing yourself to, I think you can choose how you want to be shaped and affected. And over a period of time, the tools from those books, insights, the way of looking at the world will become an integral part of who you are. So some of you might be thinking that who has all this time to read so many books? If you think about it, it does not take that much time. So let's do simple math. Let's assume you are able to read for 30 minutes a day. Now, 30 minutes is not very difficult. If you are willing to consider any format, from a paper book or a Kindle or Audible, you have many different ways to consume a book. If you spend time in a gym or you go for a walk, if you commute, if you're any of the big cities in India, for sure your commute. For most people, there's easily an hour of commute. And let's be honest, most of us are not very productive. You're probably watching some content or probably on some calls. So I think we can find this half an hour window in the morning, some during commute hours or evening to wind down. Most books takes 6-7 hours. So if you are able to half hour a day, I think you should do 1 hour a day. But even with half an hour, you can finish a book in 2 weeks. So which means 2 books in a month, 25 books in a year, 250 books in 10 years. I'm guessing most people listening to this podcast are probably in the 20s or 30s or 40s. So if you're somebody in 40s and people in the 20s, rest assured, you will be 40s one day. So let's talk to anyone who's in 40s. If you were reading just 30 minutes a day, you would have finished over 500 books. And you can be absolutely sure that very few people around you who would have read 500 books. 500 books means 10 to 20 books per topic across 30-40 topics. You can't even begin to imagine the perspective you will have as a result. If you really are curious about the world, you want to give your brain right kind of nourishment, and also just indulge in what I think is the rightful heritage. We are very fortunate to be born now where we have all the tools, access to all of humanity's knowledge. All these books they have written ever, they're literally available on our fingertips. You can go to Amazon Kindle, buy, and within few seconds the book is going to be on your phone or your Kindle device. Hundreds of thousands of books are free. There are all these memberships which gives you access to a lot of books for just fixed subscription and so on. So if you are able to create that 30-minute window and stay with that habit, we've talked about compounding many times in this podcast. I think compounding applies to reading books as well. I try to read between 1 to 2 hours a day. In my good weeks, I'm able to finish 2 books. Bad weeks, about one book, and barring very few periods in life, I've stayed with that for over 30 years. So you can do the math of how many books I'm probably able to read. But I think I feel quite enriched. And I don't think of books as a tool that because I've read a book, I'm able to do XYZ better. I think it's just improves the quality of life for me. Just being exposed to so many different ideas, being able to consume creative output from so many authors, and being able to triangulate ideas across various fields, developing bigger understanding of who we are, where we have come from, where we are going, how the world works. I think it's quite intellectually rewarding by itself. So needless to say, I will very strongly encourage most people listening to this podcast to find that window. And you can look for good book recommendations. There are so many great lists. Goodreads, it's an outstanding tool. You can go to Amazon and look at the best-selling list. It's almost like a addiction for me. Most days I end up on that page and will go to a genre and look at the best-selling books in that genre. These days I like coming soon books even more. So if you go to Google and search for coming soon books, Amazon.com, it'll take you a page where you can see the books that are going to come in next 3-4 months. And just going through, it gives me good sense of what are the things people are going to write about. Some of the authors are familiar, so you can pre-order those books, and their anticipation itself makes it that much more fun, because now you can see, like, I'm going to read this particular book in June when it comes out. So you can figure out a way, what's your method of finding a good book. But there's no dearth of resources as long as you are willing to find the time. My friend Neelkant, whom we have done a whole series on this, he is an avid reader. Most people think he's a walking encyclopedia of economic policy, and it's because he reads voraciously. And he was telling me that his main method of reading is when he goes for his morning walk. He has his Audible on, and so now you're getting morning sunlight, you're walking, getting some steps in, getting your heart rate up, but also absorbing content for whatever books you're listening to. And today Audible has pretty much all books are accessible there. So hopefully this podcast will act as enough of motivation for you to start your reading habit or double down on your reading habit. And if you are able to come to consider between 30 minutes to an hour a day, you will start finishing a book in 7 to 10 days, and it's absolutely going to change your life. As I've gotten deeper and deeper into books, I realized that there is a whole world about books. 3 years ago, I went to Jaipur Lit Fest for the first time. We did a shoot with Namita, who was the founder of Jaipur Lit Fest, but the place is absolutely amazing. It's like a Disneyland for book lovers. You have 5-6 days filled with so many author talks. Some of the best authors from India and the world, come for Jaipur Lit Fest. You have so many conversation about books, about new topics that are affecting our culture, society, policy, economics, lively debates. It's really colorful. In Bangalore, we have Bangalore Lit Fest. There is Kochi Banale Lit Fest. I did not realize that we have such a rich heritage and so many rich cultural festivals around books. We have some iconic bookstores. During my time in Silicon Valley, I used to go to Borders and Barnes and Noble and spend hours. And great thing about bookshops there is, usually they will have coffee shop as well. So you browse the aisles, pick a few books, go down to coffee shop, get a cappuccino, sit down, and just, basically there's no worry in the world. You are lost in the world of books. I have discovered, lately that we have some amazing bookstores with incredible heritage in India. In Bangalore, we have Higgins Bottoms, Gangarams, and Blossoms. They're all outstanding bookstores with endless aisles and a lot of both modern books as well as hard to find books and really good vibe and ambience. The smell of books. If you like books. In Delhi, we have Bahari and Sons in Khan Market in Mumbai, Kitab Khana, which was incidentally right next to my office at our Digital. So it was a great respite, step out of office and walk in there with a nice, again, coffee store inside the bookstore. I'm sure there is one in your city as well. So you should consider hanging out in the bookshops as well, in addition to other things that you may be going out. It's great to see that Crossword is doing very well. I think the chain with over 150 stores now, they're opening 50 stores every year. So good to see the interest in books rising in the country with festivals like JLF, Bangalore Lit Fest and others. So many regional books are coming out. There are online portals such as Pratilipi, which encourage pretty much anyone to write and publish pretty much free of cost. So I think we are seeing emergence of original Indian content. I really hope we'll be able to invite a lot of authors on this podcast, have in-depth conversation about not only the books they're writing, but also who they are, what is their process of reading, informing themselves about the topic, and how do they go about writing these books. But from everything I've seen in the last few years, I'm very optimistic about the whole book scene in India. I think we'll see increasingly more and more authors come out who will write very deeply about what's happening in India. We have a whole revolution underway in terms of economic growth. Society is changing. We are rediscovering our roots. The cultural identity is changing, and authors and books have a big job of researching, parsing, articulating that so that all of us have much more informed worldview. So super excited about the future of books in the country. At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.